Chapter 4. Age of Ultron. Laila was with the others as they continue to fight off Hydra. "I swear these idiots breed like rabbits," Laila says, and Tony let out a little chuckle. Laila managed to fight off one of the soldiers that was coming after her. Then she notices Tony fly to the building, but accidentally the roof. "Tony, watch out for that!" Laila was about to warn Tony. "Shit," Tony says as he hits the roof. "Language," Steve says before asking Jarvis a question. After more fighting, Laila goes to help Natasha with Clint as he's been hit. Wait a second. No one else is going to deal with the fact that Cap said language and Laila made a George of the Jungle reference? Tony asks. "We know," both Laila and Steve says as they continue to fight Hydra soldiers. Laila sees Steve throw his motorcycle towards the soldiers and fights back the soldier that nearly stabbed her. "Damn, that was hot," Laila mutters to herself. "Just slipped out," Steve says, but he didn't hear Laila complimenting him. Laila clears her throat as she tries not to laugh, as she took that in the wrong way. Laila fights off more soldiers before noticing something is off. "What the hell?" Laila says to herself. Then she feels someone or something push her onto the floor. "Son of a..." Laila says after falling, and she looks up and sees a blur running away, and she looks confused before getting up. After getting up, Laila manages to fight off the soldier who was going to hurt her. Then she sees Steve and Thor work together to defeat the other Hydra soldiers. "There's too many soldiers," Laila mutters to herself as she continued to fight. "Tony is already inside," Steve says. "We need to try and maybe stop whoever they are," Laila says to Steve. "Yeah, ... Steve says, and they continue to fight off the soldiers before heading into the building. "Baron Strucker," Steve says after knocking out another soldier. "Hydra's #1 thug," Steve says. "Technically, I'm a thug for SHIED, Baron says. "Well then, technically, you're unemployed," Steve says. Laila goes to fight off the other soldiers while Steve is talking until Wanda came over and made her see a vision, and she looks confused as the room changes. "What the hell?" Laila says, and she hears a woman's voice and she turns around and sees a woman holding a baby, and she looks confused. The woman sings a lullaby to the baby, and Laila listens in before she hears a male voice. And Laila looks over to Thor, and she realizes she's having a vision as she just saw Thor disappearing. "Come on, get out!" Laila mutters to herself. Then she sees one of the soldiers going to attack her, and she grabs the guy's arm and manages to break it by twisting his arm back and kicks him hard to push him away. "Where Loki's scepter?" Steve asks. "Don't worry, I know when I'm beat. You'll mention how I cooperated, I hope," Baron says. "I'll put it right under illegal human experimentation," Steve says, but Wanda shows up behind him. "How many are there?" Steve asks. Then, Wanda knocks him down using her telekinetic powers, then quickly leaves. "We have a second enhanced. Female. Do not engage," Steve says as he stands up and he looks at Strucker. Meanwhile, Laila notices something out of the corner of her eyes and she looks confused. "What the hell?" Laila says to herself, and she goes to the poster and looks confused. "What the..." Laila says, and she grabs the poster before hearing Steve's voice, but she quickly hides the poster and looks over to Steve. "Are you all right?" Steve asks, and Laila nods. "Yeah, sorry, just got distracted," Laila says, and Steve looks at her confused for a moment, then both of them head back to the aircraft. In the aircraft, however, Laila couldn't help but look at the poster she found, and Steve couldn't help but steal glances at Laila, even though he knows she's taken, and he does wonder what got her attention. Natasha notices how Steve is looking at Laila, and she secretly smirks to herself before breaking the silence as she speaks to Bruce. "Hey, the lullaby worked better than ever," Natasha says, and Laila looks up from her poster. "Just wasn't expecting the code green," Bruce says. If you hadn't been there, there would have been double the casualties. My best friend would have been a treasured memory, Natasha says. Exactly, and I know you don't get along right now, but we needed your help, and don't worry, hopefully we don't need the big guy again yet, Laila says as she smiles at Bruce. You know, sometimes exactly what I want to hear isn't exactly what I want to hear, Bruce says to them. How long before you trust me or Laila? Natasha questions. It's not you two I don't trust, Bruce says, and Laila looks at him, but Natasha goes to ask Thor a question. Thor, report on the Hulk? Natasha asks. The gates of hell are filled with screams of his victims, Thor says. Then he sees Natasha glare at him before continuing. But not screams of death, of course. No, wounded screams, mainly whimpering, a great deal of complaining and tales of sprained deltoids and gout, Thor finishes off. Laila listens in to the conversation before hearing her phone go off, and she grabs her phone and checks the message, and her face changes from happy to anger, and Natasha and Steve notices. Laila puts her phone away after replying to the person. Laila, are you okay? Steve asks, and Laila looks at him and shakes her head. No, that bastard cheated on me, Laila says. Language, Tony says, and Steve looks over to him as Laila does a little laugh. Really? Steve asks. Steve, it's okay, I needed that laugh, Laila says. Thank you, Laila, Tony says, and the helicopter landed on the pad, and everyone went inside. Inside the Avengers tower, everyone is having fun. Laila is talking to Thor. I had a younger sister, but I think Loki took her away, Thor says to Laila, and she thinks to herself as she remembers the vision she saw, then shakes her head before replying. What happened? Laila asks, and Thor was about to tell her, but there was a knock on the door. Laila looks over to the door as Natasha opens it, and her smile disappears as soon as she saw August. Layla's now ex, then Natasha pins him against the wall. You have a nerve to show up here, Natasha says. I need to talk to Laila, August says. You don't get to cheat and try and sneak back into her life when she wants nothing to do with you, Natasha says. August tries to come up with an excuse on why he cheated on Laila, but no words come out, and Laila stands up and walks over. Natasha's right. You don't get to come waltzing back after you cheated, Laila says. But Laila, August says. Save it. I want you to leave. This tower and my life, Laila says, and she stood her ground, which August took as a sign, and he nods before leaving. Steve was watching the interaction, and he was secretly smiling at how Laila dealt with him, and Laila looks over to everyone. Now, where were we? Laila says, and everyone laughs and starts to have fun again. As everyone is having fun, Clint talks to Thor before getting up and walks over to Thor's hammer and tries to lift it up, but fails. And one by one, everyone tries to lift the hammer, but fails, but there's only two people who are close to lifting. It was Laila and Steve. Looks like you all are unworthy, Thor says. Laila couldn't lift it as she was lying to Thor about her getting a vision from Wanda, of her being his sister. Steve, on the other hand, was lying to Tony about who murdered his parents. Well, not exactly telling him about it. Well, we tried. That's all that counts, Laila says as she quickly looks at Steve, as he now talking to Sam, and Clint notices and walks over to him. Talk to him, Clint says. And say what? I can't bluntly say, hey Steve, want to go out for coffee? It's stupid. And besides, I just gotten out of a relationship, Laila says. Who said anything about relationship? You can still talk to him like friends, Clint says, and Laila thinks to herself before nodding. I will, Laila says as she smiles. Laila thinks for a moment before walks over to Steve and Sam and starts to talk to the both of them. Natasha and Clint notices how both Steve and Laila looks at each other, meanwhile the other is talking. They're so in love with each other, Clint teases and Natasha laughs. That they are, Natasha says. After talking, everyone grunts, as there's suddenly a loud screeching pierces through the room. "What the hell was that?" Laila says, and she sees something moving, and she follows Steve into the room. "Worthy? How could you be worthy?" Ultron says. "Start?" Steve says. "Jarvis?" Tony says. "I'm sorry, I was asleep, or I was a dream," Ultron says. "Reboot, Legionnaire OS, we got a buggy suit," Tony says as he's tapping his device. "There was a terrible noise, and I was tangled in strings. I had to kill the other guy." "He was a good guy," Ultron says. "You killed somebody?" both Steve and Laila says. "Wouldn't have been my first call. Down in the real world. We're faced with ugly choices," Ultron says. "Who sent you?" Thor says. "I was a suit of armour around the world." Ultron plays a recording of Tony's voice. "Tron," Bruce yells, "in the flesh. Or no, not yet. Not this chrysalis, but I'm ready. I'm on a mission," Ultron says. "What mission?" Natasha says. "Piece of our time," Ultron says as the wall explodes and several Iron Legion bots barge into the room. The bot starts attacking the team, and everyone starts to fight back. "This is perfect. New distractions," Laila says to herself. "Start!" Steve yells. "We are here to help," the Iron Legion says. One sec, I got this," Tony says. "We are here to help. We are here to help. Is unsafe. Please, back away," the Iron Legion says, before it uses its thrusters to hold itself afloat. Ultron says, and the Iron Legion lowers the weapon, and Steve grabs it and throws it to Thor as he yells his name so that Thor can hit it with his hammer. "It's unsafe! It's unsafe!" the Iron Legion says as Tony tries to attack with his fork. "Come on, that's the one," Tony says as he shuts down the Iron Legion. The fight continues before Clint throws the shield to Steve. "Cap," Clint says. Steve uses his shield to dismember the last Iron Legion bot. Meanwhile, with Laila, she's talking to Natasha as they continue to fight. "What are you planning on doing now that you're single?" Natasha asks as she fights off the Iron Legion. "Truthfully, I have no idea," Laila answers, and after the fight, she sees everyone gather in the lab. "What the hell is going on?" Laila says. "Ultron," Steve asks Bruce, and Laila sees Natasha check the files. "He's been in everything. Files, surveillance, probably knows more about us than we know each other," Natasha says. "He's in your files. He's in the internet. What if he decides to access something a little more exciting?" Rhodes says. "Nuclear codes," Maria says. "Nuclear codes. Look, we need to make some calls. Assuming we can," Rhodes says. "Nukes? He wants us dead?" Natasha says. "He didn't say dead, he said extinct," Steve says. "Still doesn't make it better, Stevie," Laila says, and she sees Steve look at her and does a little laugh. "He also said he killed somebody," Clint says. "But there wasn't anyone else in the building," Maria says. "Yes, there was," Tony says as he brings up how destroyed 3D image of Jarvis's consciousness. "This is insane," Bruce says. "Hey, I've got an idea. Next time if you get an idea, maybe don't do it," Laila says. "I agree. I should have thought it through," Tony says. "No shit, Sherlock," Laila says, and Natasha teases Steve with. "Steve, she said a bad word," Natasha says as she points to Laila, and Steve just shook his head. "Jarvis was the first line of defense. He would have shut Ultron down, it makes sense," Steve finally says. "No, Ultron could have assimilated Jarvis. This is strategy. This is rage," Bruce says. Thor barges in and grabs Tony by his throat, holding him up. "Thor, put him down," Laila says. "Whoa, whoa, whoa, it's going around," Clint says. on, use your words, buddy, Tony says. I have more than enough words to describe you, Stark, Thor says. Thor, I am not going to ask again. Put him down, Laila says as her tone shifts to an anger mum tone. Thor looks at Laila, then at Tony before looking at Steve after putting Tony down. Thor, the Legionnaire, Steve says. Trail went cold about 100 miles out. Bit, it's headed north, and it has the scepter. Now we have to retrieve it again, Thor says. Natasha says, the genie's out of that bottle. Clear and present is Ultron. I don't understand. You built this program. Why is it trying to kill us? Helen asks. Tony starts to laugh, and Bruce subtly shakes his head at him to stop, as Laila rolls her eyes and holds her head. You think this is funny? Thor asks. No, it's probably not right. Is this terrible? It's so terrible, Tony says. This could have avoided if you hadn't played with something you don't understand, Thor says. Men, can we not fight right now? We have much more important things to do, like stopping Ultron, Laila says. Layla's right. We need to find a way to stop Ultron, Steve says. Okay, let's start planning, Tony says. Together, Steve says. We'll lose, Tony says. Then we'll do that together. Thor's also right. Ultron's calling us out, and I'd like to find him before he's ready for us. This world's a big place. Let's start making it smaller, Steve says. Everyone looks over to Maria as she starts to speak after she just walks in. He's all over the globe. Robotics labs, weapons facilities, jet propulsions labs, reports of metal man or men coming in and emptying the place, Maria says. Fatalities? Steve asks. Only when engaged. Mostly guys left in a fugue state going on about old memories, worse nightmares and something too fast to see, Maria says. Maximoffs. Well, that makes sense that he'd go to them, Steve says. Not anymore, Maria says as Laila notices Clint is on his phone. Then she sees Steve walk over to him. That's negative. I answer to you. Yes, ma'am, Clint says, before Steve interrupts him. Barton, we might have something, Steve says. Gotta go, Clint's saying before ending call, and he looks at Steve. Who was that? Steve asks. Girlfriend, Clint says, and Laila teases him. Girlfriend? I didn't know Clinty boy was a catch, Laila says in a teasing tone. Clint laughs to himself at that before walking to another room with the others, and Steve walks with Laila with his hands behind her back. What's that? Tony asks. A message? Ultron killed Strucker, Steve says. And he did a Banksy at the crime scene. Just for us, Tony says. This is a smokescreen. Why send a message when you're just given a speech? Natasha asks. Strucker knew something that Ultron wanted us to miss, Steve says. Yeah, I bet he's... Natasha says. Then she looks at the computer monitor, then follows up with, Yep, everything we had on Strucker has been erased. Not everything, Tony says. Everyone starts to go through the physical files they have on Strucker. As everyone is looking through the flies and chatting, Steve and Laila look at each other without the other knowing. But Clint and Natasha notices, and Steve broke the silence by speaking up. Known associates, well, Strucker had a lot of friends, Steve says. Well, these people are all horrible, Bruce mutters to himself. Tony speaks up as he sees an image of Clowers and Laila, thinks to herself before snapping out of it, as Tony speaks up. Wait, I know that guy from back in the day. He operates off the African's coast, Black Market Arms, Tony says as Steve shoots him an accusing look, but Tony speaks again. There are conventions, right? You meet people. I didn't sell him anything. He was talking about finding something new, a game changer. It was all very Ahab, Tony says. What's this? Thor asks as he points to Clower's neck. It's a tattoo. I don't think he had it, Tony says. No, Theses are tattoos. This is a brand, Thor says. Steve sees Laila leave the room and he looks confused for a moment before engaging with the conversation. Laila walks over to her bag and she grabs some pads from it before walking over to the bathroom. Meanwhile, back at the other members, Bruce identifies the brand on Klau's neck on the computer before speaking up. Oh yeah, it's a word in an African dialect meaning thief, in a way that's not friendly. Bruce says. What dialect? Steve asks. Wakanada, Wakenda. Bruce tries to say the name, but manages to get it. If this guy got out of Wakanda with some of their trade goods, Tony says. I thought your father said he got the last of it, Steve asks. I don't know, what comes out of Wakanda? Bruce asks. The strongest metal on Earth, Tony says as he looks at Steve's shield. Laila comes back from the bathroom and she notices everyone gearing up, and she joins them before finding where Ultron is and after finding him. Tony speaks up. Ah, Junior, Tony says as he lands and Thor and Steve and Laila come up behind him. You're going to break your own man's heart, Tony finishes off. If I have to, Ultron says. We don't have to break anything, Thor says. You clearly never made an omelette, Ultron says. He beat me by the second, Tony says. Ah, this is funny, Mr. Stark. It's what, comfortable? Like old times, Pietro says. You know, for a fight, this seems more like talking than fighting, Laila points out. That's true. Let's start, Wanda says before the fight starts. After a while, Steve manages to knock Pietro off his feet. Stay down, kid, Steve says. Wanda again makes Laila get another vision. Meanwhile, Steve looks over to Thor. Thor, status, Steve says meanwhile with Laila. Laila! A random woman's voice calls out and Laila looks confused and sees the room changing into a room she doesn't recognise. Back to Thor and Steve. The girl tried to warp my mind, take special care. I don't doubt a human could keep her at bay. Fortunately, I am mighty, Thor says. Back to Laila. Laila sees a woman in her vision, and she sees the woman walking closer. Laila, I thought I would never see you again, the woman says. What the hell? Laila mutters to herself as she doesn't know who the woman is, but she notices a man she recognised. Her brother, she just found out aka Thor from the previous vision about, and she realises who the woman is. Mum, Laila whispers to herself. Then she sees the room going back to normal, and she looks around before fighting off a person who is going to shoot her. After stopping the person who is going to shoot her, Laila looks over to Steve and notices he's in a trance, and she fights off people before waking him up. Steve, wake up! Laila says, before hesitating, then smacking him hard across the face, and Steve snaps out of it. O.W., Steve says. Sorry, but what was your vision? Laila asks. Complicated to tell, Steve says, and Laila nods before both of them, alongside the other Avengers, go back to the Quinjet. In the Quinjet, everyone is trying to come back from their visions, before Maria speaks up through the phone. The news is loving you guys, nobody else is. There's been no official call for Banner's arrest, but it's in the air, Maria says. Stark Relief Foundation? Tony asks. Already on the scene. How's the team? Maria asks. We took a hit. We'll shake it off. As Tony ends the call, Laila talks to Steve about everything with August. The breakup, the cheating, everything. As they were talking, they could feel themselves getting closer and closer to each other, and both Laila and Steve could feel their hearts skip a beat as they leaned in closer to kiss. But they got interrupted by Clint's voice and they pull away from each other. We're here, Clint says, and he lowers the Quinjet before walking off and walking into the house with the others. Inside the house, a brown-haired woman comes out and Laila does a little awkward smile. Hi, company. Sorry I didn't call out ahead, Clint says as he kisses Laura's cheeks. Hey, Laura says. Gentlemen and Laila, this is Laura. Clint introduces her to everyone. I know all of your names, Laura says, and everyone apart from Laila looks at her awkwardly. Boys, stop it, Laila says, and the boys does a little awkward smile before one by one say, hello. After a while, 2 noises appear and then 2 children come running in and everyone looks confused. Ooh, incoming, Clint says, and Laila does a little smile. D-A-D, Laila yells before Clint picks her up and she looks over to Laila. Are you Auntie Laila? Laila asks, and Laila looks at her before smiling and responding. Yes, I am, sweetheart, Laila replies. Steve watches the interaction with Laila and Laila, and he thinks to himself before going outside to speak to Thor. Meanwhile, Laila asks Clint if Natasha came, and Natasha speaks up. Why don't you hug her and find out? Natasha says. Laila watches the interaction and she smiles before she sees Natasha touching Laura's stomach and asks her a question. How's little Natasha, huh? Natasha asks Laura. She's Nathaniel, Laura says. Natasha's smile disappears as she bends towards Laura's stomach. Traitor, Natasha says. Laila notices Steve and Tony speaking outside, and she watches the interaction from the window, and she watches Steve tear apart a tree without using an axe, and she mutters to herself. Holy shit, Laila mutters to herself. Then she hears a voice which makes her scared. Language, Laila, don't make me tell Steve, Natasha teases her. Jesus, Natasha, you scared me, Laila says as she looks over to Natasha. Sorry, Natasha says as she walks over to her. What's up? Laila asks and both of them start to talk and Natasha asks her a question. I don't know. Maybe try to date again, Laila says and Natasha perks up at that. I know a perfect someone for that, Natasha says as she grabs Laila's chin and makes her look at Steve outside. Okay, I know, but we're both busy with stuff that's going on. Like, right now, Laila says. Maybe after that, go ask him out. And before you say anything, this is modern times. You can now ask him out, Natasha says. Laila thinks about that for a moment and she nods. I'll try it, Laila says. After more talking, both Laila and Natasha seize the other, forming in a room, and they went to join them. Ultron took you folks to play to buy himself time, Nick says. What about Ultron himself? Steve asks. He's easy to track. He's everywhere. Guy's multiplying faster than a Catholic rabbit. Still doesn't help us get an angle on any of his plans though, Nick says. He's still going after launch codes? Tony asks. Yes, he is, but he's not making any headway, Nick says. As the group continue to talk about Ultron, Nick comes out with, Outwit the platinum bastard, Nick says, and both Laila and Natasha decide to tease Steve. Steve doesn't like that kind of talk, Natasha says, and Laila follows it up with, He's old-fashioned like that, Nicky, Laila says. You know what, Romanoff and Jenkins? Steve says, and Natasha does a teasing smile and Laila laughs to herself. Everyone continues to talk about Ultron and comes up with plans, then they split up, and Steve, Laila, Natasha and Clint goes to find Dr. Cho. As they arrive, however, Steve looks at them before whispering. 2 minutes. Stay close, Steve says. Laila nods before walking into the room, and both Steve and Laila sees Dr. Cho wounded. Dr. Cho! Steve says as he goes to help her and Layla's nurse. Instincts kicks in and she goes to help clean off the wounds. He was uploading himself into the body, Cho says. Where? Steve asks as Laila continues to clean Cho's wounds and she listens into the conversation. The real power is inside the cradle. The gem, its power is containable. You can't just blow it up. You have to get the cradle to start, Cho says. We have to find it, Laila says, and Dr. Cho looks at her, then Steve before nodding. Go, Cho says, and both Laila and Steve goes, and Laila sees Steve talking to the other through the comms. Did you guys copy that? Steve asks. We did, Clint says. I got a private jet taking off across town. No manifest. That could be him, Natasha says. There, it's a truck from the lab. Right above you, Captain. On the loop by the bridge. It's them. I got 3 with the cradle, 1 in the cab. I could take out the driver, Clint says as he notices a truck heading across a bridge. Negative. If that truck crashes, that could level the city. We need to draw out Ultron, Steve says as he jumps onto the roof of the truck. No, leave me alone, Ultron says. Well, he's definitely unhappy. I'm going to try and keep him that way, Steve says after Ultron blasts the truck door as he tries to enter. You're not a match for him, Cap, Clint says. No, I agree with Clint, Steve. Don't do anything stupid, Laila says. Thanks, Barton and Jenkins, Steve says as Ultron unplugs himself from the cradle and blasts Steve back onto another car as he tries to enter the truck. But, with some manoeuvring, Steve manages to get back onto the truck's roof. You know what's in that cradle? The power to make real change, and that terrifies you, Ultron says. I wouldn't call it comfort, Steve says as he tries to fight with Ultron. Stop! Ultron yells, but Steve's shield gets caught in his chest, and he smacks it away and fires at Steve. We got a window, 4, 3, give 'em hell, Clint says to Natasha as both Clint and Laila watches what's going on. Natasha drops out of the Quinjet onto a bike and rides towards the truck. On her way, she picks up Steve's shield. I'm always picking up after you boys, Natasha says. They're heading under the overpass. We've got no shot, Clint says. Which way? Natasha asks. Hard right. Now, Clint yells. Natasha heads over to the truck as Laila and Clint watches, and both of them see Natasha give Steve his shield, and Steve use it to knock Ultron away from him. Out of the way! Coming through! Sorry, coming through! Natasha says to the pedestrians on the pavement as she chases after the truck on her bike. Come on! Steve yells as he continues his battle, and Laila stands up and manages to get onto the truck and starts to help him. Clint, can you draw out the guards? Natasha asks. Let's find out, Clint says. Beep, beep, Natasha says to the pedestrians who's in her way. Clint manages to draw out the drones from the truck. Heading back towards you, so whatever you're gonna do it now, Clint says. I'm going in. Cap, Laila, can you keep him occupied? Natasha says. We'll try, Laila says. What do you think I've been doing? Steve asks. As Natasha enters the truck, the drones head back, pick up the truck and lift off. Though package is airborne, I have a clean shot, Clint says. Negative, I am still in the truck, Natasha says. What the hell are you? Clint says. You're lucky right now. Steve doesn't have his comm in Clinty, Laila says as she fights off Ultron, and she sees Pietro and Wanda turn up on the train to help them. Please, don't do this, Ultron says. What choice do we have? Wanda says. Ultron flies off and Laila looks over to them. Welcome to the side that wants humanity alive, Laila says, and Pietro does a little chuckle at that. I lost him. He's headed your way, Steve yells to Clint. Nat, we gotta go, Clint says. Nat drops the cradle into the Quinjet, but her foot gets caught by Ultron, and she's pulled away. Nat, Cap, you seen Nat? Clint says. If you have the package, get it to Stark. Go, Steve yells. Do you have eyes on Nat? Clint asks. Go, Steve yells before looking at Pietro. Can you stop this thing? He asks Wanda. Laila watches Pietro picking up civilians and move them out of the way, while Wanda uses her powers and stops the train. After stopping the train, Wanda goes over to Pietro, who now is out of breath. I'm fine, I just need to take a minute, Pietro says. I'm very tempted not to give you one, Steve says. Steve, relax, he's just a kid, Laila tells him. The cradle, did you get it? Wanda asks. Stark will take care of it, Steve replies. No, he won't, Wanda says. You don't know what you're talking about. Stark's not crazy, Steve says. He will do anything to make things right, Wanda says. Stark, come in. Stark, anyone on comms? Steve says. Ultron can't tell the difference between saving the world and destroying it. Where do you think he gets that? Wanda asks. Wanda, this is just his one-time mistake. I'm not brushing off what Ultron has in store for humanity, but it technically wasn't his idea, if I remember correctly. It was Hydra-controlled Witch, Layla says. Wanda goes quiet for a moment when Layla said that and she nods agreeing. I know, Wanda says. After a while, Layla, Steve, Wanda and Pietro arrives at the lab. I'm going to say this once, Steve says. How about nonce? Tony says. Shut it down, Steve tells him. Nope, not gonna happen, Tony says. Boys! Fighting each other isn't going to help us stop Ultron, Layla yells at them. I know you're angry, Wanda says. Oh, we're way past that. I could choke the life out of you and never change a shade, Bruce says as he walks over to her, but Layla steps in. Lay one finger on her, Bruce. I will kick your ass so hard you won't be able to sit for weeks, Hulk or not, Layla says sternly. Steve looks at Layla, then at Bruce, who reluctantly backs off. Banner, after everything that's happened, Steve says calmly. That's nothing compared to what's coming, Tony yells. You don't know what's in there, Wanda yells back. This isn't a game, Steve says. The creature, Wanda says. Pietro uses his speed to destroy the lab equipment. No, go on, you were saying, Pietro says. Layla holds her head as she shakes her head as everyone starts to fight. Unbelievable, Layla mutters to herself. Then she kicks Bruce's ass like she said she would, before Thor stops them with his hammer. Wait! Vision says, and he launches himself at Thor, who throws him at a window, but catches himself before hitting him as everyone looks shocked. I'm sorry, that was odd, Vision says as everyone gathers around him. Thank you, Vision says to Thor. Thor, you helped create this? Steve asks. I've had a vision, a whirlpool that sucks in all hope of life, and at its centre is that, he says as he points to the gem inside Vision's head. What? The gem? Bruce says. It's the Mind Stone. It's one of the 6 Infinity Stones, the greatest power in the universe, unparalleled in its destructive capabilities, Thor says. Then why would you bring it to... Steve asks. Stark is right, Thor says. Oh, it's definitely the end times, Bruce says. Thor says the Avengers cannot defeat Ultron. Not alone, Vision says. Why does your vision sound like Jarvis? Steve asks. We reconfigured Jarvis's matrix to create something new, Tony says. I think I've had my fill of new, Steve says. You think I'm a child of Ultron? Vision says. I say no, if you was, you would have attacked us, Layla says, and she looks at the others. He's not, Steve asks Layla. We don't know he's plotting it, Steve explains. Steve, Layla says. Steve looks at Layla. Meanwhile, Vision took notice on how Layla looks at Steve and bluntly says, Layla, your heart rate increases by 23% when Captain Rogers looks at you, and your pupils dilate by approximately 14%. Are you unwell? Or is this related to your attraction to him? Vision asks as he's tilting his head. Oh my god, Layla yells, and she quickly looks away from Steve as she holds her head. Vision, are you on our side? Steve says, flustered. I don't think it's that simple, Vision says. Well, it better get simple real soon, Clint says. I am on the side of life. Ultron isn't, he will end it all, Vision says. What's he waiting for? Tony asks. You, Vision says. Where? Bruce asks. Sokovia, he's got Nat there too, Clint says. If we're wrong about you, if you're the monster that Ultron made you to be, Bruce says. What will you do? I don't want to kill Ultron. He's unique, and he's in pain. But that pain will roll over the Earth, so he must be destroyed. Every form he's built, every trace of his presence on the net, we have to act now. And not one of us can do it without the others. Maybe I am a monster. I don't think I'd know if I were one. I'm not what you are and not what you intended. So, there may be no way to make you trust me. But we need to go, Vision says as he looks around at them all before he holds up Thor's hammer as stares in shock. When Thor takes it, Vision walks off. Glad to know Vision is worthy, Laila slightly teases Thor. Thor looks at Laila before looking at Tony. Right, well done, Thor says as he pats Stark on the shoulder. 3 minutes, get what you need, Steve says to the others. Everyone starts getting ready to leave. Stark loads up Friday into his Iron Man suit, now Jarvis is no longer available. Good evening, boss, Friday says. No way we will get through this. If even one tin soldier is left standing, we've lost. It's gonna be blood on the floor, Tony says. I got no plans tomorrow night, Steve says. That's true. He hates you the most, Vision says. Vision, don't think he needed that, Laila says, and Vision shrugs his shoulders. Ultron knows we're coming. Odds are we'll be riding into heavy fire, and that's what we signed up for. But the people of Sokovia, they didn't. So our priority is getting them out, Steve says. Laila sees Pietro speeding off as she continues to listen to Steve. All they want is to live their lives in peace, and that's not going to happen today. But we can do our best to protect them, and we can get the job done and find out what Ultron's been building. We find Romanoff and we clear the field. Keep the fight between us. Ultron thinks we're monsters and we're what's wrong with the world. This isn't just about beating him, it's about whether he's right, Steve says. Laila notices a stray kitten, and she sees one of the robots that Ultron made, and she runs over to the kitten and picks her up and shields the kitten as she gets hurt by the blast from the robot's gun, but she didn't feel it. Laila notices she was bleeding, but she didn't care, and goes to put the kitten somewhere safer, but she notices the kitten is licking hand, and she realised that the kitten is thankful before Laila went to fight alongside Steve. What was you doing? Steve asks as he fights off the robots. Saving a kitten. I can have empathy for animals too. Laila teases Steve as she fights off the robots as well. Never thought you were a kitten person, Steve says. Ouch, you think I'm not an animal person? Laila teases Steve. No. Steve sighs before grabbing Laila and pulling her close as he covers them with his shield. Once we win, if we do, I'm taking you out on a date, Laila says bluntly. You've got yourself a deal, Jenkins. But first, we survive this, Steve says after momentarily pausing, as he lets her go after protecting her. After more fighting, Steve ends up with Thor, and he helps out another woman out of the car. You'll never what? You didn't finish, Steve says as Thor lands on the bridge on top of another car he was saving. What? You were napping? Steve says. Laila was with Clint and Wanda, and as they finish the robots near them, Laila hears Clint talk to Steve through the comms. All right, we're all clear here, Clint says. We're not clear. We are very not clear, Steve yells back. All right, coming to you, Clint says. Laila sees Pietro speeds in, picks up Wanda and leaves. Keep up, old man and woman, Pietro says. When we're done here, I'm going to beat his ass, Laila tells Clint, and Clint does a little chuckle before jogging towards the action with Laila. Laila sees Natasha and Steve arguing, and she looks confused for a moment before getting why. Everyone up here versus everyone down there, Natasha says. I'm not leaving this rock with one civilian on it, Steve says. I didn't say we should leave. There's worse ways to go. Where else am I going to get a view like this? Natasha says. Glad you like the view, Romanoff. It's about to get better nice, right? I pulled her out of mothballs with a couple of old friends. She's dusty, but she'll do, Nick says over the comms as the helicarrier shows up. Fury, you son of a bitch, Steve says. Oh, you kiss your mother with that mouth, Nick says. Language, Rogers, Laila teases as she grimming, raising his brow as she looks at Steve. Steve looks at her knowing she's echoing Tony's jab. You planning to keep score now, Jenkins? Steve says as he slightly smirks. Always, Laila teases. Okay, you love birds. Stop flirting and more fighting, Nick says. All of them arrive at the place and they see Ultron above them. Is that the best you can do? Thor says, and Ultron summons his army of robots to join him. You had to ask, Steve asks. This is the best I can do. This is exactly what I wanted. All of you against all of me. How could you possibly hope to stop me? Ultron says. Well, like the old man said, together, Tony says. Everyone starts to fight off the robots with their own abilities. You know, with the benefit of hindsight, Ultron tries to say, but Hulk interrupted him by knocking him far away. The robots start to retreat. They'll try to leave the city, Thor says. We can't let them, not even one. Rhodey, Tony says. I'm on it, Rhodey says as he approaching the robots. Oh, no, I didn't say you could leave. War Machine coming at you, right? Rhodey says, but Vision flies in and helps to destroy the robots. Okay, what? Rhodey says. We gotta move out. Even I can tell the air is getting thin. You guys get to the boats. I'll sweep for stragglers, be right behind you, Steve says. But what about the core? Clint asks. I'll protect it. It's my job, Wanda says. Steve, Clint, Laila and Natasha leave. I know what I need to do. The dining room. If I knock out that east wall, it'll make a nice workspace for Laura, huh? Put up some baffling. She can't hear the kids running around. What do you think? Clint asks. You guys always eat in the kitchen anyways, Natasha says. No one eats in a dining room, Clint says as they reach the lifeboat. We don't have a lot of time, Clint says. Less talking, more on the boats now, Laila says before going to help the others, and Natasha goes to find the Hulk. Laila sees Ultron shooting at Clint and the boy, and she sees Pietro speeding over, but she gets into Pietro's way and gets shot in the stomach. Shit! Laila says before Ultron leaves and she looks at Pietro. Careful next time, speedster, Laila teases. And Steve is going to kill me, Pietro says. He has to go through me first, Laila says as she holds her stomach before walking back to the lifeboat. After a long battle in Sokovia, Laila is in the ward healing from the blast on her stomach, and she looks over to Steve as he walks in. Laila? Steve says as his voice is low, rough from worry as he sits down next to her. I know. I was reckless, Laila says. You weren't supposed to throw yourself in the line like that. Not for me. Not for anyone, Steve says as a little warning. We've lost too many people from our times. I didn't want to have Wanda feeling the same. Not yet. Not like that. She's just a kid, Laila says as she looks at him with honesty in her eyes. You could have died, Steve says quietly as his expression softens, but fear doesn't leave his eyes. So, could you shit? Everyone, but we didn't. We're still here, Laila whispers as Steve reaches out and touches her cheek. Once you're healed, I'm taking you out on that deal, Steve says softly and Laila nods as she smiles. After a while, as Laila heals in the hospital, Steve goes to the Avengers compound and he walks over to Natasha. You want to keep staring at the wall? Or do you want to go to work? I mean, it's a pretty interesting wall, Steve asks. I thought you and Laila were still gazing into each other's eyes. How do we look? Natasha asks. Well, we're not the 27 Yankees, Steve says. We've got some hitters, Natasha says. They're good. They're not a team, Steve says. Before we go out, how's Layla from that blast? Natasha asks as she looks at Steve. She's healing, Steve says and Natasha says before saying, Let's beat 'em into shape, Natasha says. Steve and Natasha walk out of the room and they gather Rhodes in his War Machine suit, Vision, Sam in his Falcon suit, and Wanda, and Pietro in a new suit. Avengers, Steve says.